In this video, I'm going to create a compound fracture. I'm going to be building it on my forearm. I'm just going to do the one bone. So in this case, it will be compound fracture of my radius. I'm going to be making the injury. So the compound fracture shows up around here, which is the midsection of my forearm. And at this point, the radius bone looks something like this. I'll be making this bone out of this air drying modelling clay. I got this pack from a branch of The Works discount bookshop. It only cost me £1, so it's very cheap and it's very easy to handle. So to start off, take out an approximation the amount of clay that I want. I'm going to be making a section that is about 50mm in length. To gauge size, about half the width of my arm, and it's approximately the right depth. And I know that by pinching my own arm. I'm just going to have a play around, mould around, try and get everything together. So I'm just kind of making it into a block, but keeping this bottom edge with a groove in it. Don't have to worry too much about the ends, it's just I like to be able to play through. Take a little bit of water. Water keeps the clay workable, but it also turns the surface to a very fine powder, almost like a cutting compound. You can use it to fill up cracks. You don't have to be too perfect at this stage because I'm still going to do a lot of cleaning up after we put in the cut for the fracture. And the good thing about bones is they don't have to be uniform. Good old saying, nature doesn't draw in straight lines, so it's good to have some undulations. Now I want this so the bone is breaking like that. So this edge will have a sharp point that sticks out from my arm. So I'll make the first cut. I'll flip it over. There we go. So I've got two parts separated. Right, so first of all, I'm just going to see how much of the shape we've lost. Quite a bit. So I'm just describing the inner line where I think the marrow would occupy. Now just remove some of that area to create a bit of a void, so that after we've actually cast this bone in white silicone, afterwards I can go over and inlay some sort of orangey red for the marrow. So we'll leave that one for now. We want to repeat on this. I think that would be the marrow. Now I'm just going to tidy up this bottom edge. And now from that marrow line, definition there. In my eyes, bone has 3 layers. You have like a solid line of calcium, and then there is a series of calcium cell chambers, and then you have the marrow. When you get a fracture, you tend to see those sort of straight lines. Everything's moving in this direction. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just give that impression of this, sort of like the opposite of rings on a tree. Rings on a tree, lines on a bone. So keeping those sort of outlines there, trying to make out what this, because this is where the point was. Unfortunately, I've filled it with some gummy water. Okay, now we'll repeat the same with this part. Okay, now I just want to see how they compare. Not bad. The safest way for these to dry will be standing on this end at the bottom. And I'll just take a couple of old sponges, one to brace, the other to dab. And just like I said about the internal structure, if you want to go in a direction, go in a line along what would be the length. Now I'll leave these to air dry, and then I'll put them in my airing cupboard to completely dry, and it should be good by tomorrow morning. So now they've almost dried, I'm just going to do one additional thing, and that's to join these 2 pieces together here. 2 reasons for this. One, where I've cut this piece, because this is the piece that I want to actually use primarily. I've made it a bit short. I would have preferred this piece to be as long as this, so that where I push it into plasticine to make the mould, I can push it up to about there, and I've still got a nice finger hold to draw it back out. So it's to correct that mistake, but also just generally for housekeeping. These 2 ends marry up to each other, so it makes sense to try and keep them together, otherwise they might get separated from each other when I'm storing them. I'm just going to use a piece of air drying clay. I'm just going to rotate this because it's easier for me to see. I'll sandwich the 2 together. And I'll just loosely remove the excess from the top. Quick spin around. Pop that piece in the water so it doesn't dry out. Take a little bit more of it, nice and wet. Bit more because it slightly tips down there. So just make a little sloppy sausage. Gently pat it down. Screed it out. Use a wet sponge just to take some of the slop off so I can see how the join's looking. I'll leave this for today to dry and overnight in my airing cupboard, and tomorrow we can start with the next step, which is casting it into silicone. So now our clay bone completely dried and joined together, we're ready to make a mould. For the mould, I'm going to be using plasticine. Because I'm doing bone, I'm using a lightish white. So first off, I'm just going to roll it out. I've already kneaded the plasticine to try and ensure that there are no internal cavities. So that's good enough for my needs. So I'm just going to use my other tile just to try and make sure that the surface is not only flat but is fairly level. And to make this bone so it's coming out sort of like that, but only that much of it. I'll use my finger. I want it to be sort of like that. So I'm working upside down. Just force the clay into the plasticine. Now extract. Now just for the other end, I really just want this face. Now to cast our moulds, I'm just going to be using Platsil silicone and a little bit of retarder, just so I've got a little bit more time to work with. So first, I'm just going to dish out my part A. I just eyeball my measurements. To this, I'm just going to add not even a drop there, just what was hanging off the pipette of Platsil retarder. Then colour it with white, a tiny scratch of yellow, and then we add same amount Platsil part B. good mix. Now the mix is done, bring our mould back in and we simply pour. With the remainder. Okay, now I'll just clean off my tools and wait for that to dry. With the retarder it should take 20 to 25 minutes to fully set. It's time for the big reveal. I'll just start by going around the edge and just picking it back. This is just in case around the edge you got some very feather thin parts that might form good detail for the finished item. You might pull them off when you come to demold. So clear the edge. Now just going to score down into the mould. And basically crack it open. Now we have our two pieces of bone. It's not a perfect union. No one will be comparing the ends. Now we're ready to put in some bone marrow in these channels. And for that, I'm just going to use Platzil. And for colour, I want to make it almost a peach, a pinky yellow. So I'm just using a combination of red, white and yellow. Just building up this colour so I get a nice balance of pinky yellow. Yeah, I like that. Now just to aid this colour, I'm put in a very small amount of red flocking, roughly the same amount of yellow flocking. And now I'll just add roughly the same amount Platzil Part B. And now I'll just quickly mix and then apply. just like in my previous videos, I'm waiting for the point where silicone starts to go off so I can start prodding it and teasing it. We're almost there, it's picking it up, but it's still quite fluid. And in this one I am stabbing it quite roughly. The whole bone structure is really a series of tubes running the length of the bone, or tubular cells, shall we say. Don't know how well you can see it on the camera. There's a nice sort of like texture of spotting and channels going through that. Similarly to this one. And now the next stage is apply them to the arm, then start with the open wound.